new alliance between the US, Australia, India, and Japan threatens the Chinese Communist Party, but an unexpected weakness could sink the whole ship. Welcome to America Uncovered. I'm Chris Chappell. Last week, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo did something practically unheard of in 2020. He put on the most American face mask possible and boarded a plane to Japan for an actual in-person meeting with leaders of Australia, Japan, and India. That's right, not a video conference, an in-person meeting. Legends say that in the before times, when the coronavirus had not yet ravaged the land, people once met face-to-face just like this. But that's not the case anymore. So what could possibly be so important now that these world leaders would risk face-to-face communication? China. This was a meeting of what's known as the Quad, full name Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. It's a loose alliance of the US, Japan, India, and Australia. It's geared toward countering the threat of a rising communist China.
As partners in this Quad, it is more critical now than ever that we collaborate to protect our people and partners from the CCP's exploitation, corruption, and coercion.
The Chinese Communist Party does not like this development. In response to the Quad meeting, it urged the US to drop its Cold War mentality, which only makes sense. During the Cold War, the US openly acknowledged the threat of communism and tried to counteract communist regimes worldwide. So of course, the Chinese Communist Party doesn't want a Cold War mentality. The communists lost the Cold War, and they hated being the bad guys in all our movies. So the Quad is a major challenge for the Chinese Communist Party, but it almost didn't happen at all. The Quad began as the brainchild of Japan's then Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. After he became Prime Minister in 2006, Abe proclaimed a new direction of values-oriented diplomacy, and he suggested that India and Australia were natural allies for Japan, in addition to the United States. The four countries had their first meeting in 2007 and held joint military exercises later that year. Some said the Quad had the potential to be an Asian NATO. But was the Quad really a good idea? I mean, there was so much money to be made in China, with no foreseeable downside. But there was a lot of downside to the Quad, after the Chinese Communist Party started making noise about it. Beijing's diplomats lodged protests, demanding an explanation of the mysterious talks. And China started making visa trouble for Indian diplomats. Meanwhile, in Australia, security experts were warning that the Quad would provoke China into defensiveness and hostility. Imagine what the world would be like if the Chinese Communist Party was defensive and hostile. Anyway, in 2008, Australia pulled out of the Quad after a new government took over that was more China-friendly. And it wasn't just Australia. All four countries were more friendly toward China in 2008. I mean, did you see the Beijing Olympics? In 2008, the U.S. National Defense Strategy said China was an important partner for the future, and that the U.S. wanted to build collaborative and cooperative relationships with China and Russia, which worked out great for China and Russia. 12 years ago, China was seen as a strategic partner. But now, in a post-coronavirus world, things look a little different. The current U.S. National Defense Strategy looks at China as a strategic competitor. China wants to shape a world consistent with their authoritarian model and is undermining the international order from within the system by exploiting its benefits while simultaneously undercutting its principles. And not only the U.S., but Japan, India, and Australia started to notice this as well. So in 2017, a decade after the Quad was first suggested, it finally started gaining steam again. the Chinese Communist Party has a lot to lose if the Quad moves forward. And I'll tell you why after this short commercial break. Welcome back. Unless you didn't see an ad, because YouTube demonetizes a lot of our videos. Please support America Uncovered through the crowdfunding website Patreon. So the Quad started picking up steam again in 2017. And now, the US wants to formalize it. That hadn't been possible until now. Even though informal meetings of the Quad began again in 2017, India and Australia still weren't really keen on getting too confrontational with China at the time. But that's changed. According to Derek Grossman, a senior defense analyst with the RAND Corporation, for the first time in the Quad's history, the stars are aligning for a harder line on China. Not only are the stars aligning, but there's a joint US-Japanese armada at the end of the rainbow. Wait, stars and rainbows and aircraft carriers? It's just like Mike Pompeo's favorite breakfast, Cold War yumtality. That's the kind of analysis you don't get from the RAND Corporation. So why have the stars aligned for the Quad? Because the Chinese Communist Party has been defensive and hostile. A few years ago, India was reluctant to come out too hard against China. This year, Chinese soldiers killed 20 Indian soldiers in a border clash. Public sentiment in India became more and more negative towards China. And as of last month, the Indian government has banned 118 Chinese apps over national security concerns. The Australian government has radically changed its stance on China too, which all started when they realized that the Chinese Communist Party was aggressively interfering in Australia. Yeah, really aggressively interfering in Australia. And it's only gotten worse. The Chinese regime was really unhappy about Australia's call for an investigation into the origin of the coronavirus, for some reason. So they responded with what was called boycott diplomacy. The Chinese regime has boycotted Australian beef, barley, and coal. They even detained an Australian journalist. Chinese state-run media began calling Australia the poor white trash of Asia. So India and Australia are a little more on board with the whole let's counter China thing. Here's Australia's foreign minister at the Quad meeting last week.
This important step in the continuing evolution of the Quad signals our steadfast commitment to working together to promote an open, inclusive and resilient Indo-Pacific. The Quad has a positive agenda. It's a diplomatic network that assists us as democracies to align ourselves in support of shared interests. We believe in a region governed by rules, not power.
Oh, Foreign Minister Payne. Quadrilateral agreements don't work on rules unless you've got power. So it seems like there is a very real possibility the Quad will become a formalized agreement capable of countering the Chinese Communist Party. Except there's a weak link in a place you might not expect. I'll tell you what it is after this short commercial break. Welcome back. So as I was saying, there's a weak link in the Quad in a place you might not expect. Japan. Now that may sound surprising since the Quad was originally Japan's idea. And for years, the Chinese Communist Party has fueled anti-Japanese sentiment inside China to distract from domestic problems. Yeah, you know something is suspicious when there's a protest in China and the police don't do anything to stop it. But as of September this year, Japan has a new Prime Minister, Yoshihide Suga. And before taking office, Suga expressed a negative view of an anti-China coalition. And China is trying to court him. And how could this ever fail? I guess Shidada wants a Suga daddy. Days before the Quad meeting, Xi and Suga had a phone call. And this is what Xi Jinping said.
China is stepping up efforts to foster a new, dual-cycle development architecture, with the domestic cycle as the mainstay, and with domestic and international development reinforcing each other.
Oh man, He knows how to sweet-talk Suga. Dual-cycle development architecture?
Delicious.
Just so you know, phone calls between the Chinese and Japanese leaders is a new thing. The first one was in May 2018. Traditionally, it was the job of the premier, a figure lower in the Communist Party's hierarchy, to hold phone calls with Japanese prime ministers. She changed the long-time custom 2 years ago to signal an advancement in the bilateral relationship. So yeah, Xi Jinping is trying to woo Japan. And this dual-cycle development thing is a big deal. Later this month is a major meeting of the Chinese Communist Party, the 5th plenary session. It's basically when the party lays out the next 5-year plan for China's economy. Yes, China still has a planned economy. Don't let anyone tell you it's not a communist country anymore. So expect to hear a lot more about Xi Jinping's dual-cycle development at that meeting. There's another issue with Japan and the Quad. In 2014, Japan reinterpreted its pacifist constitution. It now will only come to the aid of an ally like the US when Japan's own security is threatened. However, NATO requires all members to defend one another regardless of whether they themselves are attacked. So that particular rule might not work for the Quad. On the other hand, the Quad might be okay without it. And how successful will China be at swaying Japan? Yes, Xi had a call with Suga before the Quad meeting, but Suga took several calls before Xi, calls with India, Australia, and the US, the Quad leaders. And after the coronavirus outbreak, Japan started offering over $200 million in subsidies for Japanese companies to get out of China. That's been incredibly popular in Japan. And according to the Pew Research Center, about half in Japan say they have no confidence at all in Xi. Japan also stands out as a country where less than 0.5% of the public, effectively no one, reports having a lot of confidence in China's president. So while the new Japanese Prime Minister's stance on China is still unknown, I don't really see Japan and China getting that close. Of course, there is another big unknown, and that's the US presidential election next month. What priority would a Biden administration give to the Quad, and to China in general? So like many things, the future of the Quad could depend on the US election. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. Thanks for watching America Uncovered.